So in this video, we are going to study about scope of supply under GST. So the scope of supply includes, first of all, section 7. This says about scope of supply. Section 7 subsection 1 of CGST Act, it says for the purpose of this article, the expression supply includes the following things like all the forms of supply of goods or services or both, such as sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, or disposal made or agreed to be made for a consideration by a person in the course of furtherance of a business. So anything you are doing, why? For the sake of a business, whether it is exchange, barter, license, rental, these all things includes supply. Import of services for a consideration, whether or not in the course of furtherance of a business, this is also a kind of supply. The activities specified in schedule 1 made or agreed to be made without a consideration, right? That there are some activities which are specified in schedule 1, which we'll see in the next slide. So even those are also called as the scope of supply. The activities to be treated as the supply of goods of services, the supply of services as referred in schedule 2, even these are also treated as the scope of supply, or even these are also supply according to section 7 subsection 1 of CGST Act. Now what section 7 subsection 2 says? It says that it contains activities or transactions specified in schedule 2. These are the supply. The activities which are specified in schedule 3. Such activities or transaction undertaken by central government or state government or any local authority in which they are engaged in public authorities, as may be notified by the government or on the recommendation of the council, shall be treated neither as a supply of goods nor as supply of services. Where a government has notified, whether a state government or a central government or any local authorities which they are engaged in some public authorities, where they notify by the government on the recommendation of the council, right, shall be treated neither as a supply of goods nor as the supply of services. While section 7 subsection 3, it says subject to the provision of subsection 1 and subsection 2, the government may on the recommendation of the council specify by notification the transaction that are to be treated as, right, the transaction which will be treated as a supply of goods, as not as a supply of services, a supply of services not as a supply of goods, right? A government can treat the supply of goods as only supply of goods, not as a supply of services, while a supply of services will not be treated as supply of goods. This is as per section 7 subsection 3, which is notified by the council by the notification transaction, and these are treated as below. Now what are the schedules? The schedules are very important. These, as per schedule 1, these are the activities without consideration, right? Means you are doing this, you are selling this, you are doing exchange or something, but you are not getting any consideration for it. So the first is permanent transfer or disposal of business assets, where input tax credit has been availed on such asset, right? So here you are availing input tax credit, which means there is no such consideration will be paid on as a GST, because already you are getting a benefit as input tax credit. So you will be getting benefit for your output tax credit. So this activity is without consideration of paying the GST. Similarly, supply of goods or services or both between related persons or between distinct person, as specified in section 25. Section 25 has said about supply of goods and services between either related person or maybe between the distinct person, when made in the course of furtherance of the business, provided that gifts not exceed 50,000 rupees. When anybody is giving any gift of 50,000 rupees, that kind of supply of activity is also called as without consideration. Those activities are also without consideration. Third is supply of goods, right? If anybody is supplying any kind of goods, and in that they have categorized two sub-classification: by a principal to his agent, where the agent undertakes to supply such goods on behalf of the principal, right? Agent has taken full-fledged authority that he will supply the goods to the different people on behalf of the principal. By an agent to his principal, where the agent undertakes to receive such goods on behalf of the principal, or the agent has said that he will receive all those things on behalf of the principal. First case was that on behalf of the principal, he will supply the goods. And second case was on behalf of the principal, he will receive such kind of goods. In both the cases where there is a supply of goods, the principal or the agent, they don't have to give any kind of consideration. So this activity is also without consideration. Third is input of service by a taxable person from a related person, or from any other establishment outside India in the course of furtherance of the business, right? If anybody has got any kind of import of services, right, import of any kind of services by a taxable person from a related person, right? So such kind of things even are called as the activities without consideration. Now, schedule 2, we spoke about schedule 1, we studied. Now, schedule 2, it says about supply of goods or services. First, it says about transfer. Transfer in the sense, any transfer of the title in the goods is a supply of goods, right? Title in the goods means the change in the ownership from one person to other person. Any transfer of rights in the goods, or of undivided shares in the goods without the transfer of title, there is also a supply of goods, supply of services. You are not supplying full title of the goods, but only some of the part of the shares of the goods will be transferred. So that is also a supply of the goods. Transfer we call generally. Any transfer of title in the goods under an agreement which stipulates that property in the goods shall pass at some future date upon payment of full consideration as agreed is the supply of goods, right? You have paid a part payment, you are not paid a full installment or full amount, only part of the installment is stated. Now in that case, whenever the full amount is paid at some future date, there it will be treated as the supply of goods. This all three transactions are included as transfer, which is the supply of goods. Where second case is land and building. So anybody who is dealing any lease, tenancy, easement, or lease to occupy the land in supply of services, these all things are totally we can call as supply of services. Any lease or letting out of building, including a commercial, industrial, or a residential complex for business or commerce, either wholly or partially, is a supply of services. Anybody has given any kind of a complex, or shops are there, complexes are there. So those all things can be treated as supply of services. Then treatment or a process. Any treatment or a process which is applied to another person's goods is a supply of services, right? When you treat any other person's goods, right, or a process to any other person's goods applied on any other person's goods, that is totally a supply of services. Then transfer of business assets. When you transfer your business assets, that is also taken in schedule 2, like where goods forming a part of the assets of the business are transferred or disposed, right? The goods which are forming the part of the assets, right, which are taken on the balance sheet on the asset side, either those are transferred or disposed of by or under the direction of a person carrying on the business, so as longer to form a part of those assets, whether or not for a consideration, whether you give the consideration or you don't give a consideration. Such transfer or disposal is the supply of goods by a person, because you are transferring the assets which are recorded on the balance sheet of the one company, and those things are being transferred. Similarly, whereby under the direction of a person carrying on the business, goods held or used for the purpose of business are put to use any private use. Now you are transferring that not for the business use, you are transferring it for the private use. are used or made available to any person for use for the purpose other than the purpose of the business, right? Whether for a consideration or not, the usage or making available of such goods is a supply of services, right? Now these are also done used from the business itself, but they are not involved in the business. They might have done for the private use. They are made available for a person for his own personal purpose other than the business purpose. These things cannot be treated as supply of goods. These are treated as supply of services. Where any person ceases to be a taxable person, any goods forming the part of the assets of any business carried on by him shall be deemed to be supplied by him in the course of furtherance of his business immediately before he ceases to be a taxable, right, person. So if he has any kind of goods which is forming a part of assets, when such kind of business is carried, he shall be deemed to called as a supply by him, whether the business you are supplying the goods currently or at some future date, right, immediately before the ceases of a taxable person. So those are, unless there is a condition, the business is transferred as going concern to another person, right? So business has to, if it is not transferred as the going concern to some other person, right, which will be continued by that same person. The business is carried on by a person, a representative who is deemed to be a taxable person. Here, owner is not continuing the business or he is not carrying on the business. So some person who is a representative, some person is there who is a representative of the owner. He is carrying on the business. Even in that case, it will be treated as the supply of. It is in these two cases. This is not treated unless. Apart from that, if it is taxable person forming a part of assets, there it will be treated as the supply. Next is supply of services, right? The following shall be treated as the supply of services, namely, number one, renting of immovable property. If you rent your immovable property, it is a supply of services, whether it is a kind of apartment, whether it is a complex commercial site or any other thing where you are renting your immovable property, it is supply of services. Now, construction of complex building, civil structure or a part thereof, including a complex or a building, intend for sale to a buyer wholly or partly, except where the entire consideration has been received after assurance of completion certificate where required by the competent authority or after its first occupation, whichever is earlier. So here, if you see the explanation says us clearly that when you complete, like some of the people, they are involved in construction of building. Their job is that they will construct a building, commercial sites or civil structure or complex or any other things. Then they will either sell the whole of the thing, whole building, whole complex, whole commercial site, or they will sell the part of it. In those things, whatever consideration you are receiving, right, or you are received assurance of completion certificate, whichever required by the competent authority. So here, whichever is earlier, whether you receive the amount or assurance, so both things, whichever is earlier, will be treated as a supply, right, will be treated as supply. Now, if you see about the explanation for the purpose of this clause, the competent authority means what? The competent authority here, the word competent authority is the higher authority. We take here might be the GST department is the competent authority, whereas meaning of construction in the sense the construction what they are doing, right, whether they are building something, whether it is a commercial site, complex or any other things, they are actually constructing some or other things. Now, supply of services, if it is continued now, third point is the temporary transfer or permitting the use or enjoyment of any intellectual property rights, right? You are transferring or permitting the use or enjoyment of any intellectual property rights. Using the intellectual property right of others by paying them some amount of money is also a kind of supply of services. Similarly, development, design, programming, customization, adoption, uh, then enhancement, implementation of information technology software. These various things related to the digitalization, technology, etc. These are also supply of services. Agreeing to obligation to refrain from an act, or to tolerate an act or a situation, or to do an act, right? So we are agreeing to give a particular obligation which we are liable to pay. So even that will also amount to a supply of services. Similarly, transfer of the right to use any of the goods for any purpose, right? For cash, deferred payment, or any other valuable consideration. We are giving our right. Our right is totally there on our property or assets, but some of right of our property we are giving it to someone to use our assets, right? With that, they will pay us some money. They are going to give us some money or cash, right? Because we are giving them right to use our property. So that is also called as supply of services. There is one more word called as composite supply. The following composite supply shall be treated as a supply of services, namely, right? Composite supply, many a times it is treated as supply of services. So where works contract as defined in clause 119 of section 2, where anybody has done any kind of works contract with some workers, or contract with some of the agencies, works contract kind of things happen to complete a specific kind of job or a work. Whichever contract is done, that is a work contract, and that is totally amounted to a composite supply. Similarly, supply by way of or as a part of any services, or any in any other manner, whatever so of goods, being food or any other article for human consumption, or any drink, where such supply or services is for cash, deferred payment, or other valuable consideration. Now here in composite supply, you are doing a contract for the supply of the various part which are required, like whatever, so it may be like goods, being food or any other article for human consumption, or even drinks, right? Here, other than that of alcohol, liquor for human consumption, because that is not counted under GST, as I have told you, it is counted under some other act. Whichever, wherever such supply or services for cash, deferred payment, or other valuable consideration will come. Continuously, you are going to supply that all things, food items or drink products. Continuously, it is supplied, and on that consumption, whatever tax will be paid, or supply we call for that particularly is a composition supply, and it is also a kind of supply of services. Then supply of goods. The following shall be treated as supply of goods, namely supply of goods by any unincorporated association or body of persons to a member, therefore thereof, for a cash, deferred payment, or any other valuable consideration. Okay, any of the unincorporated association, some association is there which is not incorporated and which is not having any value or existence right currently, but such kind of association or incorporation, or a body which does the supply to its members, such kind of incorporation, when they do supply to its, particularly to its members, for it may be for cash, or it may be for some kind of a deferred payment, right? It can be done for a cash or for a deferred payment. So these all things are treated whether for a cash or a deferred payment or other valuable consideration. Even such all things are called as supply of goods. Okay, so these all things are called as supply of goods and services.